This event is co-sponsored by the Inland Southern California Climate Collaborative, or ISC3. As it's known, the USTAR Center for Community Solutions, the USTAR Office of Sustainability, and the USTAR School of Public Policy. At this point, I would now like to introduce Dr. Beth Tamayinsa, the USTAR staff lead for ISC3, to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for making it out here today. I know it was a little bit confusing with some of the change of plans, so we really appreciate you coming out to support us today. We are here as the supporters meeting for ISC3. ISC3 is the Inland Southern California Climate Collaborative. It's a collaborative that is based out of UCR currently. It is made up of academic institutions, K-12, government entities, nonprofits, and like-minded community groups. And basically our goal is to get together and to be able to advance climate equity, climate education, and climate justice in the region. Oh, should I advance? Okay. All right. So one thing we wanted to also talk about was the supporters meeting. So ISC3 is, as a regional collaborative, there are several regional collaboratives across the state of California. Oh. And ISC3 is one of them. Sorry. All right. So the role of ISC3 is to mobilize members around a shared vision and policy agenda while providing local capacity building support to catalyze equitable action at all scales, to catalyze action for both climate change mitigation and adaptation throughout the region, and to provide space for network building, knowledge sharing, and regional partnerships related to climate. As many of us here are aware, this region has largely received not a ton of investment compared to other regions of California in terms of climate, and that there has not been always a very strong infrastructure around information sharing and coalition building. And part of ISC3 was a desire to be able to provide a greater foundation such that organizations who wish to look for climate funding have a place to go to be able to network, to be able to build coalitions, to be able to create these connections in the region. As many of you are aware, there's a lot of climate issues that this region faces. One of them is heat. It's warm outside today. But basically, the daily maximum temperatures are projected to increase by 6 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit by mid-century. The region is already experiencing extreme heat events. Obviously, there's also drought. This region is very arid, very dry. And as many of you have heard in the news, Southern California is having one of the driest years on record. Studies show an increased likelihood of drought with an 80% chance of a multi-decade drought by the year 2100. Wildfires, as we all have heard in the news a lot lately, wildfires will increase in frequency, range, and severity with a projected increase of 60 to 75% of land burned by the end of the century. And as I'm sure many of you have seen, CAL FIRE just updated their fire maps, in which case much of California is actually now within some version of a fire hazard zone. And then also sustainable growth. Curbing greenhouse gas emissions from transportation and stopping the conversion of natural and working lands are key to meeting California's climate goals. Why regional collaboration? As I mentioned, ISC3 is a regional collaborative. There are several regional collaboratives throughout the state, as you can see here. And basically the base idea is that working collaborative, we can do more than working on our own. We would like to be able to implement more effective solutions without being inhibited by administrative borders. ISC3 covers San Bernardino County, Riverside County, and Imperial County. So the idea is basically that the Inland Southern California counties are coming together to work collaboratively towards shared climate goals. And then the idea is also to provide a consistent strategy for protecting shared ecosystems like watersheds that jurisdictions both impact and rely on. Covered this a bit already. So there are several initiatives and projects that I would like to be able to highlight here. In the past, ISC3 has done a landscape analysis report on the Inland Southern California region and is currently involved in the 5th climate assessment, which we'll hear about later on this afternoon. We also, as I mentioned, part of the goal of the collaborative is to bring more funding down to the region to provide support for climate-related initiatives, education, and outreach. And so we provide grant and resource trackers through our newsletters and provide spaces for groups to work together to work towards funding opportunities. We also do networking and regional convening. So similar to this convening here today, we've done other activities in the past that basically bring groups together to be able to do educational outreach, to do tours of facilities, and basically to learn more about what each other is doing. There's member engagement and outreach. All of the ISC3 members are also out there in the public in engaging with folks, being at community events, K-12, basically trying to get more people interested and involved in the work of the collaborative. And then facilitating grant applications and partnerships. As I mentioned, one of the main goals is to bring more money to the region. Right now, ISC3 is part of a grant with the Santa Ana Watershed Public Authority that's basically looking at climate goals within the Santa Ana watershed, which spans over several counties. And then in the past, we've also worked on other programs through the state of California. This is just a snapshot of some of the groups that ISC3 has engaged with in the past, just to give you an idea. They encompass both community groups, public and private. And with that, I would like to pass this over to Francis Metallo from the UCR Office of Sustainability to speak a little bit more about what UCR as a campus is doing for its sustainability efforts. Francis?
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you, Beth. And thank you for preparing this slide. My name is Francis Metallo. I am the Interim Sustainability Program Officer for UC Riverside. I want to mention that we are still hiring for a Sustainability Director. So if you are interested in applying to work with us and work at UCR, you're more than welcome to apply. I'm really honored to be here today with a group of people who share deep commitment to sharing a resilient future for our communities. Today, I would like to share a few key initiatives that our office is leading. Some of these projects, I believe, are not only timely, but also deeply very relevant to our shared goals for sustainability and resiliency in the region. First of all is the campus decarbonization study. We just completed the decarbonization study in 2024, which is a major milestone for UCR. This study lays out a path for reducing our Scope 1 emissions. That is direct emissions from campus operations. So we know that we burn some natural gas on campus. We're trying to get rid of that and electrify our plant here on campus. Basically, this is a very bold move towards cutting these emissions, and I think we have been working very hard towards this. What's exciting about this plan is that it also really opens up living lab opportunities for our students. So between now and 2045, as much as we are going to be decarbonizing the campus, students will also have a lot of opportunities to work in these projects. And then the other project also is our climate action and adaptation plan. So you've probably seen this going around already. We have had our launch, we have had our initial meeting, and we're still sending out information. It takes a while for information to go around campus and also go around the community. This is going to be a year-long process that will serve as a roadmap for both reducing greenhouse gas emissions and also building resiliency to climate hazards. This plan also incorporates a UC system framework for environmental and climate justice, making sure that equity remains central in our climate work. And also, this is where I really invite you to take part in this. Through this process, we are going to have a consultant work with us, but these are external consultants. They don't know UCR very well, and they also don't know the community. And so it's only through your input that we actually get to represent what exactly we want. So please make sure that you participate. And I'm going to push this around. I was hoping to have a podium, but whatever was happening today, we have to make some changes. So that is basically the Climate Action and Adaptation Survey. The survey is anonymous, you don't have to put in your name and email. But if you want to participate in the workshops and the processes that we'll be going through the year, you're more than welcome to go to that QR code and leave your contact information in there, and also just let us know what you think. And then Very lastly, I would like to talk about some of our Earth Month events, like our upcoming Earth Month events. So I'm also going to get this going around so that you can sign up. The first one is the Dean's Panel on Sustainability that will be happening tomorrow, starting 10:30 a.m. to 12 p.m. We are going to be at the new School of Business multi-purpose room. Our provost, Elizabeth Watkins, is going to be the moderator, and we also have deans who will be there answering questions. Some of the issues that we will be talking about include like federal impacts on research. I know that we have all been affected in one way or another by this, and so this is a good forum for us to discuss that. And then also sustainability in the strategic plan, and then just how much progress we've made in terms of academic sustainability. And then also the day after that, we're going to have our sustainability showcase and flea market. And this one I've worked with our fellows and our students to get, thanks Christine, to get a lot of vendors coming to campus. And so tomorrow we have about 60 vendors who are coming from the community and here at UCR. And they will be showcasing like their sustainability efforts, sustainability products, and just interacting with the campus. Last year when we did this, we had close to 400 students, attending, and a lot of vendors who came to campus, mentioned that they had a lot of good business and students were buying a lot of zero waste and sustainability products. So you are also very much welcome to attend this sustainability showcase. And for community members, parking is going to be free, so you don't have to struggle. And the parking lot is very close to the venue. And in closing, just mentioning our decarbonization study and planning for climate resilience and building community through events are all just steps toward building a more sustainable future and culture and sustainability culture in the region. I encourage you to stay engaged, especially through that process. I'm hoping to see you in some of our workshops. And then also just share your insights. Sometimes it's really critical for us to hear what you think or what you want us to do when it comes to planning for the future. And then also just bringing everybody into the conversation to tackle this climate crisis together. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you do enjoy today's event. All right, so I'm going to welcome the next speaker, who is going to talk about Youth Voices project presentation, and her name is Nancy Nunes. Sorry.
Thank you, Francis. Hello, everyone. My name is Nancy Nunez, and I'm a third-year public policy major here at UCR. I am originally from Bakersfield and transferred to UCR. My fellow College Corp colleague, Sonia Oluch, could not be here today, so I will be presenting on behalf of both of us. Sonia is a fourth-year political science major at UCR, and she is originally from San Francisco. We both had an incredible and rewarding experience collaborating with community members through our work with ISC3. We had the opportunity to attend conferences where we networked with experts and learned about climate initiatives and deepened our understanding of sustainability efforts. As a team, we wanted to do something special that drew upon our strengths as College Corp students. As a public policy major, I interned at the city manager's office for the city of Bakersfield. While I was there, I saw firsthand how policymakers are faced with big decisions. I also noticed that most of the employees were older, and that young people were mainly interns. And it was not just in the decision-making room. In the city council meetings, it was mostly older individuals voicing their concerns as well. It is important to recognize that today's youth will be the new workforce generation. We will be taking on these very same decision-making roles, and the outcome of policies today will affect us in the future. Our perspectives deserve to be part of the conversation because our civic engagement starts with inclusion at every level. We spent the fall tabling talking with students about sustainability and climate issues, and started to realize many students were not aware of climate change and the impact it has on their communities. Through personal experience and coursework, I have learned it is very difficult to meet the needs of individuals without having their voices heard if they are the ones being affected. So we thought, why don't we ask them directly about their knowledge and suggestions on the topic, which was the start of the Youth Voices Project. To get input, we would approach students in a friendly manner and greet them. We would then proceed to explain that we were part of ISC3 and share our mission. Then we explained that we were collecting student perspectives on climate action and climate change and asked if they would be willing to participate, informing them that they would be recorded. The most challenging part was getting students to feel comfortable being recorded. Many were hesitant and we respected their decision and moved on. However, many students were fine with sharing their views on these topics while being recorded. The video clip we will now be sharing is a compilation of sample input students shared about their views on climate change and its impacts. I'm from Bakersfield, California.
My name is Isadora and I'm from Brazil. Yeah, so I'm from Redlands, California. I grew up in LA. We just recently moved out here to Redlands. Yeah. What's your name and where are you from?
My name's Connor and I'm from Southern California in Marietta.
My name is John Harmon. I'm from Uganda.
Okay, so I live in Lancaster, California. It's a really dry desert town.
So I'm Valerie and I'm from the East LA area.
I'm from Yokosuka, Japan.
Hi, I'm Justin and I'm from Santa Clarita, which is near Los Angeles.
So I'm originally from Wilmington, California.
Technically from Iran. My parents immigrated here when they were about 18. And what is your name? And where are you from?
My name is Adam Green and I'm from Riverside. It's really dry. It's getting really hot. It's like almost all Southern California. I hate the how much the weather changes per day. Like how it can go from 100 degrees to 40, 60 degrees sometimes, or like 80 degrees to 40 degrees. It sucks. I would say definitely fires. I know there's fires right now, but it's also like I've seen fires on a yearly basis as well, like near where I live. Yeah, but that would also affect air quality as well.
Yeah, it's gotten like warmer and the seasons like have been different. During the winter, it's much cooler and the seasons kind of flipped. So during the winter, it got hotter, and in the summer, sometimes it gets colder.
Well, I'm from Fullerton in Orange County, but I live in Corona now, and it's been so hot. Like it used to be a lot cooler, like in Fullerton, but now it's way hotter. So I've noticed that we don't get snow normally, but we could get snow, we still get really strange. We're also getting way hotter, way faster. It's kind of annoying because you would usually expect the seasons to change with certain temperatures, but now it's just unexpected.
I live in San Diego, so we haven't noticed much changes. Maybe just like how she said, it gets hotter in the morning a bit more, but overall, not too much.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like my hometown, Bakersfield, like it has definitely got a lot of water. In certain regions, it rains more. Like sometimes it gets cold in other regions, other places I travel to. Like I'm Colombian, I go back to Colombia. There hasn't been as much rain, and there's seasons when there's a lot of rain. Sometimes it gets really cold, sometimes it gets really hot. And it shouldn't really be like that being by the equator. So for some countries, it's been affected.
Honestly, at least in regards to Chico, we see kind of a huge fire once a year, typically during the summer. They've been worse and worse in recent years, with the last big one being 2019, and then the earliest biggest one being in around, I'd say, last year or the year before. Something that we personally noticed as people that have lived there for a while is that there's just like no rainfall in our area. Cause of that, I'm not too sure, but we just noticed that year in, year out. More plants, more hills, more kind of just everything around us has been like grayer, darker. We don't really see it as green as often. The reason for that, I'm not too sure, but I think that's one reason for us. There's a lot of dead, kind of just grass everywhere. It's easier to ignite, and yeah.
That is like more than like before. Yeah, there's times like when I was in high school, like they would be over like hotter,
Some climate issues in LA, the extreme waves, droughts, as well as occasional flooding as well.
Yeah, I think right now global warming is one of the biggest issues that we face, especially in California. Where the climate just seems to be getting warmer and warmer every year. In March it's almost 90 degrees, and we just think that's very not normal.
Probably has to do with like the ongoing like climate like change as the climate continues to, as we continue to pump CO2 into the atmosphere, it kind of creates more environmental extremes. So I'd say that's probably part of it. California is also very, very dry, and we have a lot of brush, and that does not help. So, and the recent windstorms, the freak windstorms have been also climate change. So I think.
Do you feel that you're
Our country's pretty great, so we don't have a lot of climate issues, but maybe like in the dry parts of the country, it gets like extreme. We get like very bad droughts, like bad starvations from it because of how much the heat is like is impacting the area. But that's mostly that thing because we're mainly Victoria.
super far, and I've been there, like, you definitely experience, like, not the greatest air quality, especially, like, during summer, I guess, it's super hot, like, really hot, and so, yeah, I thought definitely over the years of living here, I have that water, it's, like, more dry, there's, like, some copies anymore, seen them, so, yeah.
Currently for Riverside, if I'm not mistaken, it's more air pollution than that.
I would say it's probably how things are getting too hot. Like you can tell that it's like 80 degrees in like the middle of February, so something's obviously wrong.
The only thing Wilmington's really famous for is being one of the largest oil refineries in the state of California. Honestly, if you ever go over there, you'll notice the poor air quality there. It really impacts the poor Hispanic community over there. So it really is a trend.
Get rid of methane emissions from agriculture, because a lot of times growing our food and livestock produces a lot of methane. I think it's important to have agriculture that can feed people and also not harm the environment. Well, currently in Bakersfield, there is a lot of drought. There's not a lot of water throughout the year. And I really think that's a big issue in Bakersfield since we do grow a lot of agriculture. And agriculture obviously needs water to grow. So I think that's a major issue that they need to address and help.
I know that it's an increasing problem that we've had to deal with even more in the past decades, and it's only going to get worse as times go on. And definitely a lot of big name companies are kind of to blame for contributing to air pollution, water pollution, and all types of environmental disasters and stuff.
For me, climate change, it scares me the thought of future generations, like my family, still just growing up in this area, how they have to face disparities when we can be doing like so much to limit those disparities that we don't know about. So it stems from a lack of education, I think. So the more climate awareness that we spread, I think that's very crucial. This one here. Typically, a lot of air quality is really bad. So to that, a lot of people just have asthma. We pretty much have the same thing as well. Because we have
the virus or the thing called valley fever, and a lot of people kind of just either they're born with it or they inherit it through the air. So in my hometown, it's a very conservative area. There's been a lot of really just it's Trump country. It's Trump country, and a lot of people, you try to bring up climate change, and they just say it doesn't exist or it's not real. It's very different from here. So I just moved up here. But yeah, you kind of grow up, you know about the concept of climate change, but it's never really talked about. And because, there's nature all around. So if it doesn't affect you, then it doesn't exist.
I think the best thing to know about is what impacts it has locally rather than on a larger scale. So students are more aware of their personal impact to climate change and how it affects the local community around them.
That's a good thing. Contacting high schools. I know one incredible high school called Sherman Beat High School. It's located here in Riverside. It's one of the last remaining boarding schools for Native youth. I think going out there with a small little presentation, showing what it's about, how climate change is affecting our world. I think that'd be great. Great, thank you so much. When aspect of climate change you wish to be more about? I guess other ways to solve it. I do my recycling, I do my composting, and I do my those are the only two things I really do for that. But I wish I could know other ways to help benefit. I think little things we can do every day to change it, or I wish we had more in our education curriculum. I feel like we don't really talk about it at all. More of the specificities, because we just get, well, at least what I've been told, I get the bare bones basics, being oh yeah, ice cubes are melting, well, the icebergs are melting, and stuff like that. But it's I want to know more specifics. Okay, I know we have droughts. What are the causes of that? What exactly can I do to do something about that instead of just getting vague terms? My parents immigrated here when they were about 18, and I usually go there every few years, around every 3 years. And when I would go there when I was younger, we'd go to the capital city of Tehran, which has some of the worst air pollution in the world. Imagine going outside for 5 minutes without any PPE, and your boogers will be black for the next 3 days. That's how insane it is during the high season. And because of memories like that, it's kind of one of the reasons I became an environmental engineer. I currently do research in air quality off campus at CSER. And just memories like that make me realize how important teaching air quality is, because not only does it impact the environment, it also impacts human health and your respiratory system. And a lot of these countries have disproportionately high rates of asthma and high rates of lung cancer because people don't care as much about the impacts air pollution has. From a psychology perspective, what are some of the impacts on individuals with climate change? Definitely just high rates of depression or anxiousness. A lot of climate change is just it being super hot or way too cloudy and dark all the time. It's the anxiety one. And also me as an introvert, I like that sometimes. Every single day, reading too much and not enough sun. It definitely is just oh my goodness, being outside. Also just lack of ice. It's not good for us. Yeah, I think just being the science field just help us to fact check everything and crunch comes the standard for news or every information you get, you kind of want to go to the source or do fact checks. I think just spread information that you know is true, that's a good practice for anyone. I think something that we need to is people who make policy listening to us, because they usually think, whatever we have to say isn't as important, or they don't take it as important. The one way for us that we can get politicians and just people in power to listen to us is by either peacefully protesting or just writing letters, just for a way for us to get our voice heard. I think that it is up to the government to
tell their people, you know, hey, we have these issues, here's how we're gonna solve them. I think that ultimately the government's job is to, you know, lead its, you know, its people and state into a better position. And I think that, you know, just saying, hey, we have climate change and then not doing anything about it, you know, what do you expect us, the little men? We can only do so much, you know. Government, you know, specifically, you know, governors or the president, you know, they have the power. They have the money. So they need to be the ones to, you know, it's time for them to take a step with us and join us in climate change instead of just telling us we have a problem and expecting us to solve it.
Through this process, there were a couple of things that students said that really stood out to us. First, a psychology student shared an insightful perspective on how parents can help their children develop coping mechanisms for climate change and its impact on mental health. This highlights the intersection between climate change and mental well-being, which is becoming increasingly relevant. As climate change accelerates, it not only affects the physical environment, but also causes emotional distress, especially among younger generations. Second, a student whose family is from Iran shared a striking and vivid description of how bad air pollution is in her city, specifically noting that your boogers will be black due to the severity of the air pollution. This personal account highlights the severe environmental challenges that some regions are facing, with air pollution directly impacting daily life and health. The student's comment serves as a powerful reminder of the tangible, often overlooked consequences of air pollution on human health and the urgency of addressing environmental issues globally. Third, a student who grew up in an area where climate change was not a topic shared a common sentiment was that if community members can't see climate change, then it wasn't real and would not affect them. The student mentioned what a culture shock it was coming to UCR and to hear others openly talk about climate change. Finally, we interviewed a student who was originally from Bakersfield. This student specifically mentioned the poor air quality. This resonated with me because I'm also from Bakersfield and know firsthand how severe the air pollution can be. The region's agriculture and factories contribute significantly to the problem. Additionally, valley fever is a common illness in Bakersfield. It is a respiratory illness caused by inhaling fungal spores from soil in dry regions. During times of poor air quality or dust storms, it is recommended to not spend too much time outdoors, since the spores can easily travel through the air. My mother often warned me as a child that going outside without a mask was dangerous and that I could get sick. Through talking with over 60 students, we identified a few suggestions for addressing youth concerns. First, transparency, information sharing, and educational outreach can help community members understand the impact of different programs. Second, offering courses and workshops can help students and community members be aware of climate-related careers. If they exist, targeted advertising can help increase youth awareness of these positions. Third, partnerships with local organizations and other stakeholders can help create opportunities for volunteer efforts focused on climate change. Fourth, many youth are interested in being proactive and would benefit from opportunities to participate in lobbying and local climate action efforts. And finally, considering that today's youth will be taking on tomorrow's leadership positions, as well as inheriting the outcomes of today's policy decisions, we felt that more consideration needs to be made in terms of economic investments. For example, encouraging initiatives that offer incentives for green businesses can help drive sustainable innovation by laying the foundation for a greener and more resilient future. It has been an incredible experience to be able to interact with students on such a personal level, talking about climate change and the issues that are affecting us now, and will continue to do so in the future. We want to express our heartfelt gratitude to all of the students who spent time talking with us and sharing their experiences. We hope that this video and the project overall have provided some helpful insight on opportunities to advance climate advocacy and pragmatic efforts in ways that will resonate with our youth. Thank you. Next, we have Ashley Jackson, ISC3's California Climate Action Corps Fellow, who will present some key takeaways on bridging perspectives and building coalitions around climate action.
There we go. Hey everybody, my name is Ashley, and this is actually my second year working here with ISC3, and my last day of working here actually. So I'll actually be working with California Environmental Voters starting this next week. Hey, there's some familiar faces in the room, and I feel like I've learned a lot with ISC3, which is making connections, really going and getting out there and helping the community. I go out to different community events, whether I get paid or not, it doesn't matter to me. But like I said, I work with California Climate Action Corps through AmeriCorps, and my regional supervisor is actually in the back. So, hey, Jasmine. And like I said, it's been a real pleasure to, make these connections and also have my fellows here. Some of my fellows are here from my office as well. But with ISC3, I have connections with Office of Sustainability here, and then I have connections with the School of Public Policy. And like I said, I just learned to just really get out there. I will go to conferences, I'll go to summits, I will get dirty, I'll go out into the gardens and help plant things or dig up invasive species with different groups. It doesn't matter. Like, I just like to go out and help out in the community. And most recently, I was actually on a podcast with RUHS, which they're in the room right now with Juan, and featured on a podcast for the first time. And it was really great. It's a climate conversation. If you want to check it out, it's called Equity, and it's on Spotify and Apple as well. And so, like I said, it's just really, I've learned that by talking to people and getting to know where they come from, you learn a lot about the history of a place. I'm actually from Sacramento, and I moved down here actually like 3 years ago. And I've just like thrown myself into the work. I've been throwing myself into learning about the region. I've been doing work, out here in Riverside and Imperial and San Bernardino counties, just trying to learn like what the history of the region has been and how to improve things, going forward. And so I actually joined Air Quality Community Advisory Board, where I serve as the chair, that's hosted by a group called Empower You Edutainment. And I work with the School of Medicine, the Center for Healthy Communities. And I help to run the meetings, and I help to take notes and do the reports and stuff like that. And so, like I said, anytime I've been working with the students here at UCR, I've just tried to tell them, the same thing that I learned is like, you just got to go out there, talk to people. People want to help you. People want to tell you their story. And my students last year, they're doing great things, now. And I have a new set of students, Nancy. And Nancy's doing great. And she just did her presentation, and it was awesome. And so, like I said, I try to take them out with me to different conferences and things that we end up going to. And they've gone around campus, gotten out their shell. That's the biggest part of this job is you cannot really be introverted. You got to kind of get out there and talk to folks. And so, like I said, I've just learned so much through ISC3. We've been hosting like our bi-monthly meetings where we get folks to come from different organizations and different regions to, be together and learn from each other. Like, what are some strategies that work for your group that doesn't work in my region, but maybe it works for your region? This might help. Or, learning about different projects that they have. Like, certain groups have now formed like coalitions where they have like health departments and environmental organizations and local artists partnering together. And like I said, that's the beauty of collaboration, though. You wouldn't know that stuff if you were just siloed into your own departments. And so I like to see that kind of stuff because my background is actually, I double majored in environmental science and religious studies in college. And people used to think I was crazy for that. Now I feel vindicated. I'm like, see, I told you, there's interconnections there. And so, like I said, that's what I've been learning more about. It's like I said, things are really interconnected. You can't just be part of the health department and want to help people. You got to kind of learn what's the environmental issues that are impacting people's health. You can't just be environmental. You got to learn about the local policies. Like, how is this impacting? Why can't we do these things? And you know, you can be a local artist, but you can also help to present data and research through your artwork, like photography, drawing, painting. And I've been seeing that actually with a group on campus called SciComm. And so, like I said, there's a lot of interconnections, y'all. So I hope that, you know, you take this time today to talk with each other afterwards and network. And like I said, learn from Professor Hopkins about what's going on in the region as well. So like I said, that's all I wanted to really share with you is go get out there and connect with each other, go help the community. And as I said, whether it's on your time or if it's off time, you can be part of environmentalism in any way. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson. Now it is my honor to introduce to you our guest speaker, Dr. Francesca Hopkins, is an associate professor of climate change and sustainability in the Department of Environmental Sciences at UCR. She's an environmentalist scientist studying the effects of human activities on the global carbon cycle, with particular interest in greenhouse gas emissions and carbon cycle feedbacks of climate change. She and her research group use a range of techniques to measure emissions of greenhouse gases and air pollutants across California, including from dairy farms, vehicles, and oil and gas sources. Let's give Dr. Hopkins a round of applause. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation to be here today. This is so great to see this group. I was several years ago, pre-COVID, involved in like kind of the formation of this group. So it's super, super exciting to see it. It's like on the ground and going really well, going strong. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the climate change assessment, the California's 5th climate change assessment. And I'll start with talking about really what we kind of learned in the 4th climate change assessment. But being a college professor, I have to make sure we're all on the same page with the science. So this is one of my favorite visualizations about the climate. I'm just curious, who's seen this visualization before, the climate stripes? Okay, so maybe like a quarter of you, a third of you. So I think this is just such a brilliant visualization of how the climate has changed. It's using instrumental temperature records that have been taken on the surface of Earth that have been carefully harmonized and interpolated to come up with colored bars that represent the temperature anomaly of every given year since about 1850. And the temperature anomaly is really the difference between the temperature measured in that year compared to the mean of the whole record. So what these colors are showing is that the years that were colder than the mean of the whole record are shown in blue colors. And then years that were warmer are shown in the red colors. And just what stands out so clearly with this global record is how warm our past couple of decades have been. Okay, we're really in uncharted territory now. So I just want to make sure, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but got to start with that. Okay, so if you are a student who's taken science classes here at UCR or elsewhere, you've probably seen data presented more like this with the yellow dots showing the temperature going up. But again, it's the same data, but I really like that, the visual punch of the climate stripes. So as we go from the global scale down to the more regional level where we live, experience the climate, and where our policies are implemented, we're dealing with something a little bit different. So this is the climate stripes for Riverside County. The record here starts in 1895 and goes up to almost the present. And it's data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. I hope these visualizations are going to be still available for you all well into the future. But if you go there, you can find every county in the US. And so here's Riverside. And what you can see is certainly we see this really important warming trend. We see those red colors in the past couple of decades, but the picture is a little bit more mixed. So I think always when we think about the climate, we just have to understand weather varies year to year. You know, we all in this room have experienced like the El Nino that we had recently with like a lot of rainfall. And then, you know, this year we have this very severe drought that led to some terrible firestorms. That's all normal stuff. But the thing that we care about again is the change in the mean. And it's going to look different region to region. Okay, so again, I have to make sure we're all on the same page here. So I want to be really clear that the climate change that we're experiencing is a problem with CO2. Okay, I'm sure, again, preaching to the choir, humans are emitting fossil fuels that is raising the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. And that CO2 is acting as a greenhouse gas, like a blanket on our planet, trapping the outgoing radiation from the sun's light and warming us up. Okay, and that's because, you know, humans have been, again, emitting CO2 from fossil fuels for the past century or so. We know that having more CO2 in the atmosphere creates a greenhouse effect. And part of the reason we know this with really high confidence is we can go back records of the Earth's temperature through time. So in particular, what I'm showing you here is a graph of Earth's history from the present back to 800,000 years previous. And this is a paleoclimate reconstruction where they basically took information from ice cores to tell us about the past temperature and the amount of CO2 that was in the atmosphere. And what you can see in this graph is that CO2 shown in the dark blue and then temperature shown in the light blue track very, very closely together. So, you know, sure, we can go out and we can measure how CO2 is absorbing the sun's outgoing radiation, but we actually know from Earth's history that there's this very tight relationship between CO2 and climate. So this is just, I just say this to emphasize, this is so well known, this is so well understood by the scientific community. There's many uncertainties about climate change, but they're really in the details. It's not in this big pattern. This pattern is just, we've known it for decades. And really, this is my absolute favorite graph. I had to show it to you. It's the record of atmospheric CO2 made at the Mauna Loa station, Mauna Loa Observatory by NOAA right now in Hawaii, that started in 1958 by Charles David Keeling, a scientist at Scripps, UC San Diego, just down the coast from us. What you can see is in the red is basically a 2-week running average of the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. And the black line is showing you just like a smooth mean. And so I think this graph is really great because it just shows unequivocally, especially since World War II, we've really pumped a lot of CO2 into the atmosphere, again, through burning fossil fuels, which has significantly raised the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. Now, those wiggles are really interesting. If you don't already know what they are, come take my class. I'll tell you all about the wiggles. But I think they just show, again, how complicated all these data sets are to understand. And the short version of that is really it's the Earth breathing. But nevertheless, that trend remains. Okay, again, and we know why this is happening. We're burning fossil fuels. I think it's really important for us to think about, again, like our local context, what is causing climate change? How are we contributing to it? Although it's a global problem. So this graph is from the California Air Resources Board inventory of greenhouse gas emissions. And it's showing the sources of CO2 from kind of like by sector. And of course, the biggest one, you probably already know, transportation. It's not just cars, it's the heavy duty vehicles that are, you know, polluting our air here in the Inland Empire. Of course, we have our industrial sources. I heard agriculture mentioned by one of the students in the previous video, and that's a particular interest of my research group. Then we have our, you know, the furnaces in commercial buildings and in homes. You know, if you replace your gas stove, you might make a small dent in this one right here, or your water heater. And then we have electricity. So you can see up there, about 11% of our CO2 is coming from in-state electricity, like the plant that Francis mentioned. And then we have about 5% coming from imports. And so, you know, this is a little off to the side, but I think we always have to celebrate our wins in this space because things are looking challenging in our future. And so I always celebrate the fact that here in California, we've done really a lot to clean up the CO2 from our electricity by moving towards renewable energy sources. So just a little note, if we were to look at this from a few years back, the numbers for electricity would be higher than you see them here. Okay, now with that background in your mind, I'm going to talk a little bit about the California Climate Assessment. So really the idea of this assessment is to share information, kind of like what I've shared with you now, but a whole lot more of it with a wide range of audiences across the state. And really, this effort started out really trying to think about reaching people who are making decisions about how we're going to deal with our future, our warmer future. And it's really important to point out that California is actually one of the most climate challenged regions in North America. And so we really need to plan and implement strategies to prepare and adapt to extreme events and shifts in previously normal averages. So, you know, the firestorms we just had back in January in Altadena are such a great example of this. And we know how devastating the impact is and continues to be. Another thing that the people who started this climate assessment project several decades ago recognize is that changes in the state's physical climate will have effects on all parts of California society. So whenever my favorite class to teach is actually my class for non-majors, because I try to impress on them that it's all of us, especially of younger generations, that need to have an active role in addressing climate change, because it does affect everything and everybody, not just the environmental science students. So everybody really should care about this and can make decisions that will have an impact. And then we also need to recognize that our state has a really strong tradition of science and research investment. And so the idea was to really bring our strengths in research and into policies to mitigate climate change. So again, Scripps built that fundamental data set. And so, you know, there's a lot of expertise here in the state that can be brought to bear on solving this climate challenge, or addressing it at least. So there have been there will be, in a year from now, 5 comprehensive climate change assessments starting in 2006. Again, the idea was to assess the impacts and risk from climate change and to identify potential solutions to inform policy actions. And again, at the beginning, this audience was really trying to look to state, local, and regional decision makers and stakeholders. So I was involved in the California's 4th climate change assessment, which was released in 2018. And the way this assessment started is they just had a report that kind of talked about everything happening in the state. But in 2017 or 2016, when they started planning the 4th assessment, they realized that different regions of the state have very different needs, in particular, thinking about the varying climate challenges of different regions. And so at that point, they decided it was really important to have regional reports to speak to different regional policymakers about the challenges for their region. So I was fortunate to be asked to lead the Inland Deserts Regional Report. Shown, you know, the outline is shown there in the orange. It's basically the eastern parts of Riverside and San Bernardino counties, as well as Imperial County. Really thinking about the desert areas that are really mostly impacted by extreme heat. Okay, so I'm going to show you mostly results that we presented in the 4th assessment, because we're still working on figuring out what data sets and models are going to be used for the 5th assessment. That being said, things haven't really changed in substantive ways. There's little details that may change, but overall things remain the same. And I'm mostly going to talk also about heat, because that's really the most important one for the region of interest here. If we look at the whole state, we can compare how much warmer we've had as a state to those global averages. So if you think back to those climate stripes, we could actually quantify the globally observed warming from 1880 to 2012 as being about 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit. Now this is already a bit out of date, okay? 2012 that's a while back now, okay? There's a lot of debate right now in the scientific community about whether we've reached 1.5 degrees Celsius. So remember, a Celsius degree is bigger than a Fahrenheit degree, so that's quite a bit warmer than 1.5 Fahrenheit. I'll let you do the math if you remember how to do it, or use your phone. I can't do it on the fly. But there's a lot of debate right now in the scientific community whether we've already passed that point or not. And there's various complications to it, which I don't need to bore you with, except that there's a lot of talk about clouds and ship emissions and aerosols having an impact on this. Oh, and actually I have it here. So in 2023, again, the number for that year, if you just compare 2023's average to the whole observational period, it's 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit of warming, okay? So you can see not only have we warmed significantly, but the pace is accelerating. And one of the big trends you can see is that the warm places are getting much warmer. So here's a map of California from the 4th assessment. comparing the period where the state really kind of grew and developed of 1901 to 1960 to 1986 to 2016. And this color bar is showing degrees Fahrenheit. And you can see that in Southern California, even back to 2016, we'd already experienced warming of on the order of 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay. So another thing I like to think about of this region is that we're really kind of a bellwether for how climate change is going to impact other places that are warming a little less quickly. Okay, so now let's look a little bit more in depth in this inland desert region that's already quite warm. So I'm going to show a lot of graphs, and as I show these are all from the 4th assessment. I want you to think about what graphs resonate with you, are helpful to you in understanding this story, because we're, again, in the 5th assessment, we're in the process of trying to decide what graphics are most impactful. So I'm going to ask for your feedback at the end, so please keep that in mind as I go through these. Okay, so these slides are showing, these graphs are showing us on the top, the daily maximum temperature and the daily minimum temperature. And what we're doing is in these graphs, we're showing that, comparing the 1960 to 1990 period to the 1976 to 2005 period, and then looking at the difference, okay? So the first thing you might realize is I told you these years, it's like a little bit funny. They're not that separated in time, but that was just an artifact of how the data was presented to us and the fact that we want to have these kind of long-term averages to get rid of events like El Niños. Okay, so what you can see is that the maximum temperature in the top panel, the difference, the daily maximum temperature rose about 0.4 to 0.7 degrees Fahrenheit, comparing these two time periods. And the daily minimum temperatures rose a little bit less, but by 0.3 to 0.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, this is probably what I think is maybe the most impactful figure for the whole report. Oh, sorry, this isn't from the report. This is a global. This is from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And what I've showed you so far is just observations of the past. And in this graph, the observations of the past are shown in this black line. You can see there's a gray bar around that. So the way scientists look at past climate and to the future is to run climate models that simulate everything we understand about Earth's climate. So we can go back to our records and we know what the climate should have been in any given year from our records, but we have these sophisticated models that can actually simulate that because we understand the physics of the climate reasonably well. Okay, and so what that means is that with these models, we can actually project how much warming we expect to have in the future, given different emission scenarios. So that's the important part. Okay, and so when we have these models, there's actually dozens of models that are used. And the way that we can have certainty or like estimate the uncertainty or how much we don't know is by taking the mean of all those models and then looking at the error, the standard deviation or the standard error of those models. So in the past, these models have been run and the difference between those models is represented as that gray area, okay? So the data is in the black, the gray is the uncertainty. When we look into the future, you can see first thing to notice is just the uncertainty gets bigger, but we have, projections for future warming shown in the solid blue line and in the solid red line. And the thing that's different between those is the amount of possible CO2 emissions that humanity will emit by 2100. Okay, and so to me, the most important takeaway of this graph is that when you look at the temperatures, projected temperatures in 2100, there's quite a large difference in the amount of warming that we'll have if we manage to really, really reduce emissions, shown in the blue, versus just continue business as usual, shown in the red, okay? Secondary point, unfortunately, no matter what we do, we're gonna continue to experience warming. And that's because the CO2 that we've already emitted is gonna stay in the atmosphere for quite a long time, and it will be really difficult to get it down. There's brilliant engineers working on this problem, but it's very, very unlikely it will be something that's could be scaled up and we could actually, fix this problem by 2100. Okay, so we expect a warmer future, but human decisions still matter. Okay, so now let's zoom in to our region again, the inland desert region, and let's kind of look at these same type of graphs to kind of think about what's going to happen in the inland deserts. So again, here the historical is shown in the black, and then the projections of the future for two different emission scenarios. They're shown in blue for the lower emissions and red for the higher. And the shaded areas are the uncertainties. And so what you can see here is that looking to the historical period, the region as a whole had a mean annual average temperature, like the daytime high over the whole year of around 80, 81 degrees Fahrenheit. And by the end of the century, it could be up to something more like 91 degrees Fahrenheit, or if you believe some of those outlier models, potentially up to something like 97 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so there's a significant degree of warming. Another way we can look at this and think about it is by breaking down the time periods of these projections into 30-year intervals, which is what's shown in this right panel here. So here again, we have the historical data. You can see the average then right there at about 81 Fahrenheit. And then you can see the range of, you know, each year is different, right? There's ups and downs, there's wiggles. So it's possible you could have years as warm, you know, that the average is as warm as 83, 83 and a half. And it's possible you have cooler years that are down at 79. When we look forward into the future, again, because we have some uncertainty in our models, you can see that the range of possibilities grows larger, regardless of the emission scenario. Okay, so again, blue, the lower emissions, red, the higher emissions. And what you can see is for this period, which we actually find ourselves in today, there's not much difference in the lower and higher emission scenario. Okay, so today we can't really detect really what a change would be, because really we're worried about the mid-end of century. And you can see at the middle of the century is where we start to diverge with these different possible projections. And then really by the end of the century, you see a significant difference in the possible futures. Okay, and so again, this is really coming down to increasing daily high temperatures. Okay, so here's again maps of the region that kind of give you an idea of the spatial patterns of the warming that we expect. The top panels are showing early century, mid-century, and end of century. For the lower emission scenario, that blue data I showed you before in the top, and then the bottom is showing the red data, that higher emission scenario. And what you can see is it's pretty widespread increase in temperatures across the region, but definitely we have some gradient going inland where it's going to get even hotter closer to the border, at least in this particular case. And not just is the daily average high temperature going to increase, the hottest day of the year is going to get even hotter. So that's what's shown on these maps here. Okay, these maps are showing the average temperature of the hottest day of the year for this region in the historical data, and then going to the end of the century for the lower emission scenario and higher emission scenario. And what you can see here, what stands out a lot to me, is that in the historical period, there are places in the region that got up as hot as, you know, maybe 113, 112, 113. But when we go to the end of the century, especially in the very worst case scenario, we're going to be thinking about temperatures around 130 Fahrenheit. Okay, that's quite hot. That's, you know, when we built this region, when we developed it, it was not for those temperatures, right? So infrastructure is going to be stressed by these higher temperatures. The panels here on the bottom is just showing the change in the temperature of the hottest day of the year. And what you can see is, again, in the most extreme cases, at the end of the century, the hottest day of the year is going to be more than 10 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than the historical hottest day of the year. So that's, again, like 10 degrees, these are big numbers. That's going to have a big, big impact on infrastructure and also your comfort being outside. Okay, so we're going to have these more extremely hot days. And one other way to kind of think about this is the number of days that are so hot to be unpleasant. So, you know, let's say that you live in Palm Springs. It's already pretty hot there. Maybe you don't care about really how bad it feels outside until it gets higher than 95. I don't know. I don't live there. And of course, at this time of year, we're not ready for the heat. That sounds really hot. If you think about the baseline period that we're looking at here of 1981 to 2000, in Palm Springs, there's about 135 days a year that exceeded 95 Fahrenheit at the hottest moment of the day. We can look forward to how that's going to change in the future. By mid-century, you know, in the worst case scenario, it might be something like 158, 160 days. But when we look at the end of the century, especially under the highest emission scenario, we project that there should be something like 179 days. So that's 1/3 of the year, or I'm sorry, 1/2 of the year. We went from kind of like 1/3 of the year to 1/2 of the year. Half of the year is summer. It's going to be like that. And here you can see, so Palm Springs that I just described is here on this map. It's definitely one of the hotter areas in the region, but there's other cities that are going to experience changes in the heat. Riverside, where we are now, Bakersfield, that has been brought up a lot today, and really all of Southern California. If you're interested in metrics like these, the state has put together an amazing tool as part of the 4th climate assessment called CalAdapt. It's a data portal that will actually allow you to explore all these data sets that I've been showing you graphs from yourself. You can make a graph for your city, you can make a graph for your zip code, you can make a graph for your county, and you can look at data like I showed you, the hottest day of the year, stuff like that. Or you can look at other things that might be of interest, like how many warm nights we'll experience going forward. There's also information about sea level rise and wildfire. But I just want to point out, I think I'm going to show that in the next slide, is the level of certainty really varies for these different climate drivers. So again, because this region is really, you know, it's a hot region, that's the most important one. I also want to point out that we have so much very, very strong evidence for increasing temperatures. Whereas when we come to the other projected impacts of climate change, we have a lot less certainty. We know probably that they will change, but it's just much harder to predict. You're much more reliant on how good your model is representing weather, okay? So I'm going to continue to focus on temperature, and I'm going to walk you through a study that a former undergraduate student who now has her PhD, but she was an undergrad at the time, did as part of the 4th climate assessment. The student, her name's Cindy Yanya, she originally was from Cathedral City, and she came here to UCR. And she and I were interested in how climate change will intersect with tourism, which is the Coachella Valley is one of their biggest industries. As you know, we just had the second weekend of the Coachella Festival. And there's not just the Coachella Festival, there's famous golf courses that, you know, all the presidents go, right, play at Rancho Mirage like at least once during their presidency. There's the Stagecoach Festival, Palm Springs Film Festival, and then the tennis tournament that's held in March. And so all these are outdoor events I want to point out, okay? Part of the reason we have these outdoor events is because we have such a beautiful and lovely climate in the spring months, especially in the Coachella Valley, which is when most of these take place. But those spring temperatures might not be so pleasant going forward. So that's what we're really interested in. And we took, so we focused on the area around Indio, which is where the Coachella Festival takes place. So I want you to see that blue square. That's the size of the grid cell of this giant weather model that was run for the data that we use for this study. And so why does that matter? Why do we care about having just data for Indio? Why is that important? The big advancement that the state made for the 4th assessment was providing downscaled model data. And so if we just think about how our climate is just here in California, Southern California, we know that there's a really big difference in temperature at the top of Mount San Jacinto, where the Palm Springs tramway goes, and the bottom of the valley. If you went to Indio and the top of the tram, they'd be very different, maybe 30, 50 degrees Fahrenheit difference, right? And that's a really common feature of California's climate. We have so much topography in our state. That means that we have small microclimates that where over a very small spatial extent, you have big, big differences in temperature. The way that traditional climate models represent this, which is totally fine for the global scale, is with very large grid squares. You can see here, a grid square would be like, you know, the whole inland desert region might have 2 or 3 grid squares. But the state took that climate model output and then used statistical techniques to downscale it much, much finer. And so that really allows you to zoom in on the city that you're interested in, where the policies that you're considering might be made. And so we took advantage of that to do our study for how tourism might change in the Coachella Valley. Okay, so here's data that just shows, again, thinking about like different time periods and different possible emission trends. I'm going to walk you through these plots. The kind of grayish, okay, sorry, first let me take a step back. These graphs are showing you temperature at Celsius. Here, I'm sorry, I did not convert it to Fahrenheit, so just bear with me. I want you to see the patterns, not the numbers. It's showing essentially the number of days within a year that each temperature was the high temperature for that year, okay? And so the gray in the background is this historical data, okay? So in the Coachella Valley, historically, there'd be, you know, a bunch of days that are something like 41 degrees Celsius. Okay, so then when you run your climate model forward, you can look at how that distribution changes. In the top panels, it's showing the lower emission scenario in blue for the future at mid-century and the end of century. And then in the bottom, we have mid-century for the higher emission scenario. And then at the end of the century. And so what's really interesting here is you can see essentially there's just a shift towards warmer temperatures for all of these different possible outcomes, different possible futures. Okay, and it's quite striking because you see there, you know, maybe a typical summer day was something like 41 degrees, but in the future, at the end of the century, if we don't manage to limit emissions, that typical summer day will be maybe something more like 47 degrees Celsius, okay? So we can do these really highly detailed analyses. And we took advantage of that to look at the snowbird season. So for those who may not know, snowbirds are a term that's used to refer to people who seasonally migrate to the Coachella Valley to spend the winter. Many of them are Canadians, many of them are from Minnesota. They're from really cold places. They want to escape the winter. Usually they're retirees and they want to come to a lovely place like Palm Springs, Palm Desert, Indio. And we know that this, the snowbird season, it's been going on for decades. Historically, it was thought to start somewhere around the beginning of November and last until mid-April. You know, some of the tourism literature that I looked at basically said, oh, kind of Thanksgiving to Easter, okay? And when we looked at the data for temperatures, the historical data being shown here on this graph where we have each month of the year shown here and then the temperature degrees Fahrenheit shown on the y-axis. So the pink one is showing the historical period, which we defined as 1951 to 1980 when this area really developed. And what we saw is that basically during that time period, the daily high temperature pretty much stays below 85 degrees. And that's very consistent with other literature that's looked at kind of people's tolerance to heat. It's above 85, 86 degrees Fahrenheit, where people start to feel a little bit uncomfortable being outdoors. Okay, so you know the historical period, you have this lovely place. It's very temperate. It's never really dipping much below 70, but it's also not going above 85 during this window of the year. Now we wanted to know what's going to happen at the end of the century, looking forward between the two different middle emission scenario and the high emission scenario. And I apologize that the colors have changed here, but the lower emissions are shown here in green, and then the higher emissions are shown in blue. And again, this is for the period of 2070 through 2099. And what you can see is, again, these distributions are shifting. They're shifting upwards. And there's a very big difference between the middle emission scenario and the high emission scenario. And if we actually take that information and assume that people are going to respond to these higher temperatures, they're not going to want to be outside when the temperature is regularly reaching above 85 as the high temperature of the day. Again, these are older people. They're from cold climates. They're not used to the heat. We can kind of try to quantify how the season is going to change. And so if we manage to limit our emissions, our snowbird season will probably go down to something like 4 months from 5.5. Okay, so maybe it's mid-November to mid-March. That's still a significant reduction. And if you're thinking about tourism dollars, you care about that 1.5 months you're missing. Actually, the Chamber of Commerce doesn't care, but they should. Okay, if you look to the higher emission scenario, we're down to 3.5 months of snowbird season, comfortable temperatures, and that's from December 1st to mid-March. So there's a significant decline in the amount of comfortable days for snowbirds going forward. So we thought that was really cool, really neat, but we wanted to look at real data. And we were really fortunate that the Living Desert collects really good data on visitation. and they were generous enough to share it with us. And so what's shown in this graph is about a decade worth of data with temperature in Celsius. I'm sorry, in scientific journals, you have to put it in Celsius. On the x-axis, on the y-axis is the number of daytime visitors. And what I want you to see in this graph is, again, 30 degrees, that's 86 Fahrenheit. That's really an important number, because if you look to the left of that, the visitation is kind of random, okay? There's not really a trend there. But once you go above this blue line, above 86, you can see there's a strong downward trend in the number of visitors as the temperature gets hotter. So we fit a model to this data, you know, believing this to be representative of how people will respond to heat. And we calculated that just climate change alone will cause a decline in visitation of about 18% by the end of the century. And that will equate to a revenue loss of something about 500,000 by mid-century, or up to almost $500,000 by the end of the century in the dollars of the year that we did this study, which is 2020. So that was really comforting to see real data, because I don't just believe in models. But, you know, of course, we also wanted to look at, you know, the most sexy event, the Coachella Festival, which I recently learned is leaving the Coachella Valley to go up to cooler place, Washington State. And we wanted to look at the likelihood of extreme heat. So for anybody who's been following the news, the first weekend of Coachella, which was like a week and a half ago, was very hot. This past weekend was much cooler. You know, it's weather. It's at the spring season where things can be whatever. We just wanted to look at kind of what's the probability. And I'm sorry, I said that I'm defining extreme heat as being greater than 105 Fahrenheit. Sorry for the typo, not Celsius. Because we assume that people attending Coachella are younger people. They're probably used to the heat. They're probably from Southern California. They're probably scantily clad. So they'll be fine, right? So if you look back to the historical period, this festival started in the early 2000s. You can see about 13% of the years had one day of this 4-day festival that exceeded the threshold, or maybe it's a 6-day festival. I haven't attended it. By mid-century, the probability that a year will have a day that exceeds 105 Fahrenheit is about 22%. And at the end of the century, it's something like 40 to 60%. Okay, so I think this is a pretty good reason why the Coachella Festival has decided to decamp from the Coachella Valley, which is really, they better not take the name, but what are you gonna do? Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of talk a little bit about another really important issue that I think this like very fine scale data can help us with, is really thinking about climate justice in this region. So for those who've been over there, you know that the Western Coachella Valley is really lush and green. You know, it has these beautiful lawns and palm trees, and you know, it looks quite inviting in that leftmost picture. In the rightmost picture, we have the Eastern Coachella Valley closer to the Salton Sea, which is much drier. There's less irrigation water applied, and it definitely looks much less inviting and much harsher climate on the right, okay? So there's huge disparities in this region that are existing today that we really need to think about if we're thinking about how climate change can interact with the policies that the state is going to put in place to address climate change. And I also want to point out that, like, you know, again, I think there's been a lot of thought put to fires recently in terms of like loss of life from climate change. And like whether the climate changed or not, we're in Southern California, there's always a chance of fire. Of course, that chance is getting higher. But I really want to point out that extreme heat is the most important health effect of climate change. Even globally, like forget about like, sure, sea level rise is scary, but like extreme heat is going to kill the most people. Okay, and it's because high ambient temperatures can cause early death and illness. Negative health impacts can occur from both chronic and peak temperature exposures. They impact the respiratory health, and they can really aggravate existing conditions. So it's people who have these pre-existing conditions that are the most vulnerable. And then the strain on infrastructure that from these higher temperatures is also going to have health implications if you have like a rolling blackout, for example. So I want to just define this term really quickly: climate change vulnerability. Vulnerability is the susceptibility to harm from exposure to stresses associated with environmental and social change, and from the absence of capacity to adapt. And we really need to think about who's vulnerable to those climate impacts, you know, by this definition. And if we think about that, it's those who are least able to anticipate, cope with, resist, or recover from the worst consequences will be the first to face the brunt of the climate change burden. And the state knows this, and they've actually built this really, really amazing tool that I also encourage you to go check out called CalEnviroScreen. And that's what's shown on the map here. It takes into account environmental risks and stressors, physiological vulnerability, and socioeconomic vulnerability for different census blocks throughout the state. And in this map here, it's showing the places that are more vulnerable are shown in the redder colors, the darker red, more vulnerable. And the places that are less vulnerable are shown in the bluer colors with the more intense blue, the least vulnerable. And what you can see is, there's very stark spatial patterns. We know these disparities exist in our state. And I'll just point out that, within this region that we're talking about, the Coachella Valley, you can see a border between the very dark blue and the very bright red. And so who are these groups that we care about? Like the most vulnerable groups are the people that are going to be exposed the most. Those will be farm workers and other people who have outdoor occupations. But there's also going to be people who don't have access to air-conditioned dwellings, believe it or not, that still exists in the Coachella Valley, or they have limited means to pay for air conditioning, meaning that they'll turn their thermostat really high to avoid spending money. Definitely, there's also issues for low-income city dwellers that are exposed to urban heat island effects. And then maybe more relevant for this region are rural poor individuals that live at the wildland urban interface that have wildfire risk as well. Okay, so if we just kind of zoom into the data that CalEnviroScreen has, we can look at kind of what are those drivers of vulnerability. Here it's showing by percentile, again with the redder colors showing the most vulnerable. And you can see the prevalence of poverty, unemployment, education levels, asthma levels, cardiovascular disease, and then a population average of all these metrics. Okay, and you see again some really bright red standing out here next to some much less vulnerable areas. And then even if we just focus on the climate specific metrics, we can think about what causes somebody to be vulnerable. It's people that don't have a vehicle, elderly people living alone, the amount of tree canopy, because trees provide so much shading, really can help you deal with the extreme heat, maximum temperature change, average maximum temperature, and increase in warm nights. Because again, if you're thinking about health impacts, your body needs the nighttime to recover. And if it stays hot at night, your body won't have that chance. And so really the inland desert is the key region for all this. And if you're interested in this issue, I recommend you watch this documentary that came out in 2021 called The Unlivable Oasis. It's freely available online. It's from some journalists that worked with Time Magazine and ProPublica. And it's a really very impactful and emotional documentary about people actually living this reality. Okay, I'm gonna wrap up by just giving you a little preview of what we're looking to for the 5th assessment. So Ryan Sendejas here in the audience is leading a lot of the work that we're doing here. We convinced the state that we should be all the deserts now, lucky us. So our region has expanded to include Lancaster, Palmdale, and up to the Eastern Sierras. So you can see the names of all the counties, cities, tribal lands and reservations, and major park areas listed there. Kind of where we're at in this project. So the project is started. We have the author team mostly together. We've established some really good partnerships with local and community groups, including ISC3. There's been some pretty significant engagement events, including an Earth Day event that Ryan held with the Tamalpaq Farms, which is the Augustine tribe of Cahuilla Indians. And then Ryan's made an amazing website that I highly encourage you to take a look at. I'll provide the QR code in a subsequent slide. And we're really trying to get the word out through the webpage and other forms of communication about the assessment. So here's a picture of a bunch of the authors. Not totally up to date, but mostly they're UCR faculty. You probably recognize somebody you know. The topics, this is not a complete list, but the major topics we're going to talk about are the natural and managed lands, including things like biodiversity and conservation, agriculture and water supply, the built environment, including energy, transportation, water conveyance and supply, and housing, and then social systems, including indigenous knowledge, economy, policy and governance, crime, public health, environmental justice, and food security. We have some excellent partners, both with the state of California and then a community group, Alianza Coachella Valley, that helped us hold an event with the community to talk about extreme heat. That event was held back in February. I'll talk about that in a second. Again, the idea of this report is, again, to go a little further than the climate assessment did before. We really hope it will foster inclusive partnerships and empower vulnerable communities, especially with new state funding under Prop 4 that will become available to fund some of these adaptation activities that we need. We're really hoping that this assessment will help establish partnerships in the community, integrate Indigenous knowledge, which is something the state has been struggling to do. We're hoping we can get there. We hope it will really enhance communication and then allow us to monitor the situation. So here's the QR code for the website. I highly recommend taking a look at it if you're interested. You can also sign up to get the newsletter, which will be released in the not too distant future. And here's my slide about the high heat. So we had a discussion with the community out in the city of Coachella back in February to try to learn about, like, what does the community already think about high heat? How are they already trying to prepare? And what we learned is there's certain pain points. Some we already probably knew about, like outdoor workers suffer the brunt, but there's also other issues where government can really step in. Many of the students are transported to school on buses that do not have air conditioning. That means they arrive to school already hot. Can you imagine being a child trying to learn when you're already hot arriving to school? There's often not shade structures at bus stops, also affecting children. And if we think about what our local governments have done to mitigate the effects of heat, is they have cooling centers that are available for any member of the public to go and be cooled off during those hottest days. Unfortunately, those sometimes will require transportation that is not accessible for many people that could use them, and their hours might be limited. So these are some of the concrete suggestions that are starting to come to the surface. Okay, and as part of the webpage, Ryan put together this really cool map where if you have experience in this region, you can go in and put a pin and you can tell us about your experience with extreme heat there. There's already been hundreds of entries. Okay, so we're still looking for collaboration in the space. So, get in touch if you're interested. Again, through the webpage, there should be a way to do that. And what I wanted to just close with is that I asked you early on, like, what graphs were impactful to you. I'm hoping that you have suggestions for graphs, metrics, or visualizations that are the most powerful. Which topics, if there's anything you didn't see that you're most interested in, and if you want to be part of the assessment, in what capacity. So I don't know if we have time for questions, but that's where I wanted to end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hopkins. Thank you so much, Dr. Hopkins, for your presentation. All this stuff is so crucial for our future. So just thank you. Wonderful job. And if you stay up, we do have a little bit of time for Q&A right now. So my colleague will run up a lapel mic to you. It'll look just like this. Just make sure you speak loud into it. So yeah. And I'm Liam Burley, by the way, just stepping in.
Are we? I don't know if this is on. Is it? It's not on. Is it? Okay. My question is, are we including humidity in how we're measuring heat?
That's a great question. And humidity has a very important effect on how your body cools itself. But it's not super relevant for this region because we tend to be fairly dry. So excellent question. It's not that relevant for here. Overall, for the most part. Yes.
I had a question about, before we talk about the effects to plants and animals, like the Joshua Tree, supposedly dying off, moving north.
Yeah, great question. So for everybody who might not have heard it, the question was about the effect on plants and animals in the region, and with the example of the Joshua Tree brought up. And definitely Joshua Tree is an iconic species, the desert tortoise or others, that their habitat is significantly shrinking. And I think one of the most important things we can do with this assessment is really encourage, the efforts to conserve public lands, to conserve in places that we know that those populations will be able to thrive well into the future. So I think that's a really important outcome. And there's quite a nice, there's been a lot of research done on this topic by many people, including people out at UCR Palm Desert. There's quite a nice summary of that in the 4th assessment report. And we will have some of those same experts contributing to the 5th assessment report. Definitely an important topic. Thanks for bringing it up. Yes. What do you mean by moving seasons? Oh, blooming seasons. Oh, okay. Yeah. So that's a great question. So yeah, the blooming season probably will change. It's not something that the experts we have on the team have focused on. So if you know somebody who's like has research in this area, I would love to have them be part of the report. So yeah, thank you for that comment. That's really great. Yes.
So, let's say, how we address the heat wave stuff, by let's say technology, something like that, to help solve this problem.
Are you thinking about like mitigation of climate change, or just like how do we adapt to higher temperatures? Yeah, okay, that's great. So I guess so on the adaptation side, I guess I'm not sure what technologies exist apart from like, of course, air conditioners probably are getting more and more efficient. And I think the important thing that we're learning is that it's not necessarily the technology that's where the gaps are. It's the connection to the technology. Like who's able to actually access those things? Who can access the cooling centers? Okay, so you're thinking more on the mitigation side. So that's another really good point. So for those who don't know the term, climate mitigation refers to basically reducing the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere to try to take us on that blue trajectory, not that red one. That is a really difficult topic. It's not really addressed much in the report because it's a whole nother field. And as somebody who really studies this, like the mitigation side, reducing emissions, we're not in the best times for that. Like it's feeling really dire. But I think you bring up a really important point that this region is really key for our renewable energy future as a state, both because of the abundant sunshine and lands where solar panels can be placed. There's already a lot of wind farms in the Coachella Valley, but also the discovery of lithium under the Salton Sea. So this region will need to be part of the economic transition to more renewables. I hope I answered your question. Yeah, okay. Yes.
The data you presented were based on the forest climate assessment.
Correct.
So there is a fifth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have those models from the fifth assessment been downscaled for California?
Great question. You would think that that would already be done by now, but in fact, the models haven't been chosen yet because in the 4th assessment, 4 models were chosen that had different characteristics. There was a cool and dry model, a warm and dry model, a warm and wet model. And as you can probably imagine, because the precipitation variability is so high in the region, it's very, very hard to model it well. Okay, so the model choice is still ongoing, and the downscaling is still an issue of discussion too, because there's statistical downscaling and then there's dynamical downscaling, which takes into account terrain and how we know winds move, and they give different results. So those details are still being worked out right now. Yeah, but that being said, again, I feel like the big picture, especially for heat, we already kind of have it here. So I think the CalAdapt website is a fascinating tool. Yeah, thank you. Francis?
Yeah. So thank you for the free. So you did mention iconic I mean also like such how populations think that time like people or if it's automatically because they're alternative
That is such a great question. And I didn't mention, but the state, in addition to having these regional reports, in the 4th assessment, they started doing topical reports. In the 4th assessment, there was an ocean and coast report, there was an indigenous communities report, This time there's going to be a report about economy and then one about actually population movement. I guess what I'll say for our report, it's really hard to know how much of a climate signal is there because we know there's so many other important drivers. Government policy with respect to undocumented people is certainly going to have a big impact on the region. And then also another really important issue for this region is housing. So not enough housing is being constructed, but we also know not enough housing is being constructed on the coast. So whether people move inland out to those deserts, I think that's happened. You know, we've seen that in like Victorville, Lancaster, Palmdale. Whether that happens more broadly is, I think, a really open question. So yeah, thanks. Chicago? Yeah, so in our region in particular, some really great work has been done here at UCR looking at the hospital admission data and other health indicators done by Ann Cheney, David Lowe, Will Porter. So certainly that data, that it's still I would say it's still at a research stage, but some of it has been published. Right. Yeah, I think we're working on that, and I'd love to talk more with you about this. I think that's why we had this event about the high heat impacts, because really, like for community members, that's how the heat affects their health, and that's their most direct connection to climate change. So certainly that's a piece of it. And I think it actually has much more of a foothold and can be much more impactful compared to the economic stuff. Because when we published our tourism study, we tried to like ask the Coachella Chamber of Commerce. They didn't care at all. So I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't run in those circles. I really have no idea. Yeah. Yes.
One way of presenting the metrics that I think is can be really powerful, and we did it a bit comparing to different 30-year periods. But one of them is the actual data, model data. But now you can present the 30-year period up to 2025 compared to that earlier period and show those differentials. And that can have a huge touch.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. So I think like the observations are so powerful on their own. And so I didn't talk about like how we're gonna structure the climate part of the report. But yes, certainly we'll have a big focus on observations because again, we've experienced significant warming. But we always have to incorporate that model piece. And I think it's really because I think it's so important to recognize that we still have choices here. Our window's closing, but
So unfortunately, that is all the time that we have today. Just